I'm in New York, and as you know, this the issue of democracy is high on the agenda here, as it is in Holland. No question about that. And my background is in institutional fundraising, so I'm not really an expert in crowdfunding or individual giving, social movements, and things like that. I focus on foundations. Government, trust funds, those types of funders. So let me talk about that today and how it may help you, your organization, and mitigating some of the impact that we're seeing. So let's see here. Oh, there we go. So as we have discussed, as some of the panelists have mentioned, civic space is closing. There are governments around the world, not just in Europe, but in Asia and Africa, Latin America, and of course, where I am now in the United States, that are putting significant pressure on civil society, on NGOs, associations, etc., to shut them down, to shut down their voices. And we heard from Paul about, Russell, about court cases being used. We've heard about, I think it was Lucia, Slovakia, foreign funding, no more foreign funding coming in. We've heard in Hungary, Sofia, I think the National Endowment for Democracy is probably dropping out, because of what's going on in the United States. So there are many ways in which governments and companies are putting pressure on organizations to shut them down, shut their voices down. So some of the ways to mitigate that is to diversify your funding base. And I'm going to talk about international funding, which maybe many of you may know about, but not, it may be new to some of you. Partnership and communications. And the most important thing I'm going to talk about is diversifying your funding. Many organizations rely on national or local, very localized funding, but there is a lot of opportunity out there. And I've worked with organizations, with NGOs around the world, and I've researched and mapped donors in nearly every country in the world. You'd be surprised how many there are. And you can see right here on the left how many foundations there are in the United States alone, and it's close to 200,000. In Europe, 170,000 plus, and we have Asia, Africa, Latin America, Brazil, Mexico, full of foundations, etc. Now, if you are involved in fundraising, then this international perspective can provide security. Funding from other countries may not be as easy to influence by governments in the country where you work. Now, is this money going to democracy? And I looked at the US as a proxy because the data from the United States is highly accurate and it's very transparent. And I can show you more about that in a minute. But we see that in the United States, foundations, and I'm just using that as a case in point, right, gave 3 billion in 22, close to 3 billion in 23. 24, we don't have the numbers yet, but I expect it to go well over 3 billion because of what's going on in the United States. Not all of that money is staying in the United States. 5 to 10% on average is going abroad, and some of it is going for democracy, to promote democracy and democratic principles. US foundations over the past few years alone gave over 200 foundations, gave close to 1,600 grants to European organizations for the purpose of promoting democracy. And it's close to 600 recipients all across Europe. So I think it's clear that if we're just using the US as an example, that lots and lots of funding is available and is moving to countries like yours, right? An organization like yours. So there is opportunity there. Now, I looked at the US Foundation Center, and they have a database with, I think there's well over 4 million grants in that database. And I use it for my donor mapping research as well. Type in democracy, 20,000 grant makers give to democracy. And like I showed you before, not all of that money is for the United States, where clearly it's needed, no question about that. But And this data is from starts in 2003. Now we see that $28.8 billion was allocated to the subject area of democracy. It can mean many, many things, of course, rule of law, etc. But it's huge amounts of money to 240,000 grants to 32,000 recipients. And like I said, some of that money is going to Europe. No question about that. Now, that's the US, and I just use this as an example, the UK Charity Commission. I went there a few days ago, type in democracy, a subject area, 50 matches found. Excuse me. 50 matches found. And if you dig deeper, you can find many others. And of course, lots of this funding is staying in the UK, but quite a lot of this funding, some of this funding is moving abroad. So if you work in the UK, that's fine, of course. But if you're working in Hungary, in Poland, in the Netherlands, it could be anywhere because democracy is under pressure everywhere. Now, we've seen that. Then there may be opportunity out there. And it's not just foundations. It could be UN trust funds. There's a UN Democracy Fund, and I've successfully raised funds from the UN Democracy Fund in the past. There are foundations in many countries in the world, in Japan, South Korea, in India, you name it. Not all of those would be interested in working in Europe, but many are. And here's an example of a mapping I did very recently for a human rights organization. The was a rule of law project. And through my research globally, I identified I think it's 177 potential matches from institutional donors, and close to 20 of those were high priority matches. They seemed like very good opportunities. So you can do the same if you aren't doing that yet. And it is very important to mitigate the impact of funding maybe drying up locally because of pressure. And we also see that in the United States, where foundations are being sued by the Trump administration to stop them from funding the things that Trump doesn't agree with, right? The second part is partnership and alliances. Partnerships are very important for a number of reasons, and there are many. Many of you work across Europe, or in many countries, and partnership can be both a protective, of course, there's value in having one voice, strength in numbers, but also very important is that it can protect you. I know I've worked with organizations that were kicked out of countries, that were shut down. The bank accounts were shut down. They were deregistered. And in those cases, maybe you can work through a proxy, a partner. You can work with an organization in another country that's still rights respecting and where you can still operate to do project work in your country. And now with online work from home, we all know that you do not need to be physically necessarily in one place to work in another place. So keep that in mind. Also communications, donors, of course, we just, and I think Russell mentioned it already, the viral campaigns, etc., and crowdfunding is important. So you communicate with your constituents, with the people that provide you with funding. And here's an example of Amnesty. In 2023, the government of the UK wanted to get rid of the Human Rights Act. A fairly idiotic idea, but through an Amnesty viral campaign, of course, with many, many others, they managed to change the government's mind. And the Human Rights Act, I believe, is still in place. So that worked. But so using social media channels and viral campaigns, etc., is very important because donors, including the foundations and other institutional donors I just mentioned, are also receiving those messages. So you can inform, you can show your impact, you can influence, right, the donor agenda. You can showcase the risk of underfunding, which I think is very important. What will happen if they do not fund you or your issue, right? Showcase partnerships, I think, and I forgot to mention it in the previous slides, but partnership for many donors, institutional donors, is crucial. They want to see people work across borders together because this issue is not just a national or a local issue, it's a regional and international issue. And very important, and I'll leave you with that thought, is listening to donors. Communications is not just storytelling, although that's very important. It is also listening to donors. Donors communicate. And you can engage with donors, communicate with donors, understand what it is that donors want. If you understand the priority of the donor, then you can offer the solution, because a donor is not a bank, an institutional donor, foundation. A donor has a priority, has a strategy. They want to change the world just like you do. So you're both two sides of the same coin, and you need each other. Okay, so that listening is very important. So thanks so much for listening, and it's wonderful to be here and hear the other panelists speak as well. And if there are any questions, let me know. Thanks.